Imagine for a moment the silence before the first heartbeat. No wind, no sky, no whisper of life. Only an endless, chilling emptiness that stretched in all directions. A void so complete it almost defied the idea of existence. The ancient Norse called this nothingness Ginnungagap, the great yawning gap, the primal void where time itself had not yet begun its steady march. It was neither light nor dark, neither warm nor cold, simply empty. And yet, within that nothingness, potential waited, coiled like a sleeping serpent. Far to the north of this void lay Niflheim, a land of eternal frost. Imagine a world made only of mist and ice, where frozen rivers crisscrossed the landscape like veins of glass, where the air itself stung and froze upon the skin. At its heart was Hvergelmir, the roaring cauldron spring from which 11 icy rivers flowed. These rivers, filled with venomous rime, coursed outward into the void, layer upon layer of ice forming as they froze, spreading further and further until they reached the very edge of Ginnungagap. Far to the south burned Muspelheim, a realm of searing fire and relentless heat. It was no gentle hearth fire but a raging inferno, alive and hungry. The sparks that leapt from its eternal flames flew outward into Ginnungagap, tiny suns against the void. At the edge of Muspelheim stood Surtur, the fire giant, his great sword blazing like a piece of the sun itself. He was the first guardian, waiting for a time yet to come when he would march forth and end the world. Between these two extremes, the killing cold of Niflheim and the consuming fire of Muspelheim, Ginnungagap was not so empty after all. As the rivers of ice crept closer to the center of the void, and the heat of Muspelheim reached outward, something extraordinary began to happen. The ice started to melt. Drops of water formed and trickled, steam rising in the frozen silence. From this meeting of opposites, fire and ice, heat and cold, chaos and stillness, life emerged. The first of all living beings took shape there in the center of Ginnungagap, rising from the thawing ice like a nightmare-given form. He was Ymir, the primordial giant, vast beyond comprehension. His body was so great that it stretched across the void, his limbs heavy as mountains, his breath shaking the silence like distant thunder. He was neither god nor man but something older, something more primal. But Ymir was not merely alive, he was fertile. As he slept, sweat formed beneath his arms, and from that sweat were born the first of the frost giants, a male and a female who would become the forebears of an entire race. From his legs, in one of the strangest and most disturbing images of Norse myth, came a monstrous six-headed sun, a creature of pure chaos. The children of Ymir were wild, untamed, and violent by nature, for they were born from a being who embodied raw, unshaped existence itself. Yet Ymir was not alone for long. As the ice continued to melt, another creature emerged from the frost, Odhumla, the cosmic cow, immense and gentle. Her milk flowed in 4 great rivers and provided sustenance for Ymir, keeping him alive. She herself had no pasture, no grass to graze upon, so she fed by licking the salty blocks of rime around her. Day after day she licked and slowly, something began to take shape within the ice. On the first day hair emerged from the block. On the second day a head. By the third day the entire figure stood revealed, a man strong and noble, his features glowing with the vitality of life. This was Buri, the first of the gods. Buri took for himself a wife, and from their union came Bor. And from Bor and his wife Bestla were born 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve, the first of the Asir gods. These 3 would go on to shape the destiny of the cosmos, but for now they grew in the shadow of Ymir and his monstrous kin. For a time the world was chaos. Ymir and his children roamed the still-forming landscape, their giant footsteps echoing in the void. There was no sun to mark the passing of time, no stars to guide the way, only the faint light of Muspelheim flickering across the ice. The giants were loud and restless, their voices booming like avalanches, their fists shaking the frozen ground. The young gods looked upon them and saw danger, a threat that would only grow as the children of Ymir multiplied. It is here that the tale takes a darker turn. The 3 brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve, came together and spoke of what must be done. They could not allow Ymir to rule unchecked, for his existence meant that chaos would reign forever. They were gods and gods must bring order. And so, they plotted to slay the giant from whom all giants sprang. When the day came it was no quiet assassination. The battle between Ymir and the 3 brothers was so great that its echoes still resound in the oldest parts of the mythic memory. Ymir fought with the strength of a mountain, his roar a storm that rattled the bones of creation. But Odin, Vili and Vili were determined. They struck him down, their weapons biting deep, until at last the giant fell. His death was cataclysmic. From his wounds gushed a flood so vast that it drowned nearly all of his children. The great oceans of the world were born in that moment, filling the void with red tides. But not all were lost. One frost giant, Ymir, and his wife managed to escape the deluge. They climbed into a hollowed-out tree trunk and rode the floodwaters until they found dry ground. From them, the race of giants would survive, nursing an undying hatred for the gods who had slaughtered their forefather. And so, Ymir lay dead, his colossal body stretched across Ginnungagap. The young gods stood over him, and where another might have seen only a corpse, they saw raw possibility. The slaying of Ymir was not the end but the beginning, the first great act of creation carved out of death itself. And with that they prepared to shape the cosmos. The great void of Ginnungagap had fallen silent. Ymir's colossal form lay lifeless, stretching from horizon to horizon, his blood still flowing in crimson rivers. The three brothers stood amidst the flood, their breath heavy, their weapons slick with the work of creation through destruction. In that stillness they saw not just what they had done but what could now be. The giant was no longer a threat, no longer a force of chaos. He was raw material, the very building blocks of a universe waiting to be born. And so they set to work. The first act of creation was not gentle but monumental. Odin, Vili and Vili dragged Ymir's massive body into the center of Ginnungagap, anchoring him in the void. From his vast flesh they carved the earth itself, stretching it wide and smooth so that it would become the great middle realm, the land that would one day be known as Midgard. His blood poured out and became the oceans, the lakes, the fjords and the rivers that carved their way through the land. The world became a place of shorelines and tides, of rushing waterfalls and still pools, all glistening with the memory of the first death. They took his bones and broke them, shaping them into mountains and cliffs. Some they left sharp and jagged, like teeth biting at the sky, while others they ground down into pebbles and sand. His teeth and jawbones they scattered, forming stones and boulders across the land. The very landscape itself was the shattered skeleton of a slain god. But their work was not finished. With divine strength, they lifted Ymir's vast skull and carried it high above the forming world. They set it upon 4 mighty pillars, one at each corner of creation. At the base of each pillar stood a dwarf, whose names would forever mark the cardinal directions. Nordri in the north, Sudri in the south, Austri in the east and Vestri in the west. These 4 dwarves would hold the sky aloft for all eternity, keeping the dome of Ymir's skull suspended over the earth below. The 3 brothers then took what remained of Ymir's brain, the strange gray matter of thought, and flung it into the air. It scattered and formed the clouds, ever shifting, ever changing just as the thoughts of the mind are never still. The new sky was no longer a hollow dome of nothingness but a living canopy, sometimes bright, sometimes stormy, always moving. But the gods looked up and saw that their new world was still dark, still cold and lifeless without light. And so, they reached into Muspelheim and gathered the sparks that leapt from Surtur's flames. They set these sparks high in the dome of the sky, where they became the stars. Some they set to wander across the heavens, glowing brighter than the rest, and these became the sun and moon. They gave them names, Sol, the shining sun, and Mani, the watchful moon. They placed each upon a chariot and commanded them to ride across the sky every day, chased endlessly by wolves so that they would never rest. From this chase was born the cycle of day and night, of time itself. Now the world had sky and sea, light and shadow, but it was still unshaped chaos at its heart. The brothers bent again to their task, smoothing the land, carving valleys and hills, setting order where before there had been only Ymir's corpse. They worked until the world itself seemed balanced, not perfect, not without danger, but shaped enough that life could flourish. And then came perhaps their most profound act, the creation of humankind. On the shores of the newly formed sea, the 3 brothers found 2 fallen tree trunks, one ash and one elm, washed up by the tide. They knelt beside them and began their work. Odin breathed into them the gift of life and spirit. Vili gave them understanding, will, and the spark of intelligence. Vili gave them form, speech, hearing, and sight. From that moment, the 2 tree trunks were no longer dead wood but living beings, the first man and woman. The gods named them Ask and Embla, and from them all humankind would descend. The The gods placed Ask and Embla within the realm they had just shaped, building a great enclosure to protect them from the wilds beyond. They called this realm Midgard, the middle enclosure, for it sat at the center of all things. Around it would stretch the other lands of creation, some friendly, many hostile, but all part of a vast and intricate design. At the very heart of the cosmos they planted Yggdrasil, the great world tree, whose branches stretched up into the heavens and whose roots plunged deep into the dark places beneath the earth. From its mighty trunk grew the 9 realms, each connected to one another by the tree's unseen pathways. High in the heavens they placed Asgard, the shining home of the gods themselves, a realm of halls and feasting tables where the Aesir would dwell and plot the order of the world. Far away, across wild rivers and icy wastes, they left Jötunheim, the land of the giants, a place where the surviving kin of Ymir could live, nursing their resentment in the shadow of the mountains. Deep below the surface of the earth they made Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves, who would soon become the mastersmiths and craftsmen of the gods. They fashioned Alfheim, a land of eternal light where the elves would dance and sing. They left Niflheim in the north, the land of mist and cold, and Muspelheim in the south, the land of fire, for they had existed since before even Ymir's birth. To the west they shaped Vanaheim, home of the Vanir, the other tribe of gods who would one day clash with the Aesir. And finally they made Helheim, the shadowed land of the dead, where those who died not in battle would go to dwell in the cold embrace of hell. Thus the 9 realms were born, balanced across the branches and roots of Yggdrasil, each a piece of a greater whole. The universe was no longer a yawning void but a living, breathing system, filled with light, sound, and possibility. And yet, for all their work, the memory of Ymir's death lingered. His blood still ran through the seas, his bones formed the hills beneath their feet, his skull arched above them as the sky. The giants in Jötunheim remembered too. They told their children and their children's children of the day the 3 brothers struck down their ancestor, and they swore that one day they would have vengeance. It is said that even Odin himself knew that this vengeance would come. He knew that the world they had created was not eternal, that the order they had built from chaos would one day be broken. For such is the way of things in Norse myth. Creation and destruction are not opposites but partners in an endless dance. Still, for now the work was done. The brothers stood together, gazing across the new world, the stars twinkling above them, the waves lapping gently at the shores. They had taken a corpse and turned it into a cosmos. From death they had made life. And thus the stage was set for every tale yet to come, for the rise of the gods in Asgard, the forging of weapons and wonders by the dwarves, the feuds with the giants, the battles to protect Midgard and humankind. It was the first great story of Norse mythology, the shaping of existence itself, and it began not with a gentle birth but with a violent death. And somewhere in the far reaches of Jötunheim, the descendants of Ymir watched and waited.